Our first product introduction, we showed it off in June of 2015, was the Debut series. And the concept behind it was to give good performance from a very affordable price point. But it's 3 years on. And so we've been looking at customer feedback, looking at dealer feedback, assessing ourselves from a performance point of view, about can we make improvements to the speakers? And the answer is yes, it's Debut 2.0. Visually obvious differences to the original Debut is a front vent and a different aspect ratio of cabinet, and a different colour of bass driver. We wanted to make the cabinet taller to accommodate a front vent, but at the same time we wanted to slim it down. And so the ratio of width to height is actually a more elegant look than the original Debut, and yet we keep the same overall volume by increasing the depth. We've also changed the vinyl to a simulated black ash vinyl as opposed to the brushed aluminum. Give a bit more traditional look, which we're finding that people like more. Why have we got a front mounted vent? It was mounted on the rear of the original Debut. Surprisingly, the third most common call into our hotline is how close to the rear wall can I mount the speakers because the vent's at the back? Will I choke off the vent? And the answer has always been, technically you won't choke off the vent. You'd have to get extraordinarily close before you physically start to block and influence the output from the port. But what is happening is the closer you get to that boundary of the wall, the more bass reinforcement you're getting from the vent, disproportionately to the amount of bass increase you're getting due to the woofer getting closer to the wall. So they become imbalanced. And so you can get both maybe too much bass under those circumstances, and also it starts to affect vocal clarity. This time we put it on the front, so it's always correctly lined up with the woofer and remains further away from the wall, so you can back the speaker closer to the wall without having problems. And cone colour is now grey rather than black, but you'll notice a different dust cap. This is a polypropylene based dust cap as opposed to the inverted aramid fibre dust cap. And that's done to smoothen out the top end response of the bass driver by optimizing where we glue this dust cap on, optimizing the diameter of the dust cap and the gluing surface. We can control the top end of the woofer and make it smoother so it's more easy to integrate with the crossover to the tweeter. The tweeter, it's an all new tweeter. So it's a soft dome tweeter still, but with a wide roll surround, just like in the Adante. It's a development of what we put into the Adante, but onto all the magnet structure that we already had for the original Debut. So it's a low cost version, let's say, of the Adante tweeter. So it gives, combined with a new waveguide shape, it gives better off-axis performance. So I wanted to design the new tweeter and waveguide to widen the directivity to give better performance off-axis, so you can have them facing straight down the room. One of the other aspects of the cabinet construction is I've now got cross bracing in all of the speakers. So one of the things I sort of compromised on, let's say, when we were trying to get the best price performance ratio, was to give up a little on the cabinet in order to spend the money on the drivers and the crossover. Well, now I've gone back and reassessed that and looked, I've still got good drivers, but now I've put some cross bracing in to better control the cabinet colorations. I like to get good extended bass response out of relatively compact speakers because I feel that's important with most music that we listen to. There's a rule of physics, it's a kind of an iron law that says you tie together bass extension, cabinet size and efficiency. You can't have all of them together. Small box, high efficiency, extended bass. If you pick two, the other is given to you. what's that trade-off between, we've fixed the cabinet dimensions, so what's the trade-off between how much bass and how much efficiency? What does efficiency do for us? It means that for a given amplifier power, we can play louder. But how often do we play at the limits of our system compared to how often would we miss bass if we don't have much of it? And so we find, or I find, both for my listening and for people I've asked about this, that we prefer the bass rather than the absolute efficiency. So that's what I've done with this. When you look at home theatre receivers and you look at the music or the sound effects, whatever, that's coming out of each channel, left, centre, right, surrounds, the predominant amount of power is coming through that centre channel. So the centre channel places most demands on the capability of the receiver. And receivers have a limited amount of total power they can produce. It's limited by the power supply. So even if it says 5 times 100 watts, that means each channel driven by itself can produce 100 watts, but it does not guarantee that all channels driven all at the same time can produce 5 times 100 watts, i.e. 500 watts. You find with lower cost receivers, it could drop down to 35 watts from the other channels. If we trade bass extension for sensitivity and impedance level, we can reduce the demand on the receiver for driving that center channel speaker. So in the case of the C5.2, we've raised the sensitivity up to 87 dB, and in the C6.2, we've raised the sensitivity up to 88 dB. But at the same time, I've raised the impedance level. It draws less current. And so the minimum impedance, we rate it as a notional impedance of 8 ohms for both center channels. But in this particular case, the minimum impedance is actually 8 ohms. And across the rest of the range, it's much higher than that. So it's a very, very easy speaker to drive. So it minimizes the demand on that center channel to allow the receiver to put more output into the other channels. So overall, the system is going to be able to play louder than it would have been with the original Debut.